I want to remember this. This is critical because it's one of the last things Jesus said before he left this earth, as he was getting ready to just physically remove himself from the earth, and he's talking to a group of his followers, over 100 people, and he said this to them: "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." So this morning we're going to focus on the name of, the identity that we have in the Son. Who is God the Son? Who is Jesus? He is the King. Why is that true? Well, let's kind of go back to the beginning. We're not going to turn there. We'll open up our Bibles in a moment here, a couple passages we're going to focus on. But back in the garden, God gave authority to the man and the woman back in the very beginning of Genesis. He said, "I've created all this. I've created it for you. I'm going to let you share in my authority. You're going to work with me, but also under me. I declare your identity." They hadn't done anything, good or bad, at that point. He says, "I provided for you." He revealed a bunch about who he was, who he still is, through what he did. But he says, "I'm giving you authority because I have all authority." And Jesus makes that same statement here in Matthew. He says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. I'm God. I'm the king. I'm the ruler." But Adam and Eve, as we know, they submitted to Satan. They decided to go with what he said. They put him in the place of God. They said, "Oh, we're going to listen to you. You said we can create our own identity by what we do. Wow, we can be like God?" Yeah, it failed, but they believed that. So effectively, they handed over their authority, not God's authority, but their authority to Satan. So Satan became the ruler of this world. And the Bible tells us that. There's several passages that mention him as that. He didn't take away, supersede God's authority, but that authority that was delegated by God to man was handed over by man and woman to Satan. So instead of being like God, they instead became slaves to Satan. And because you and I are created to live under God's authority and to rule with and under him, when we reject that, we're going to look for something else, because there's an innate thing in us as created beings that we're looking for someone to be our authority, something to give us identity, someone to give us meaning. And if we reject God and what he's declared, then we're going to look for something else. The people of Israel are a great example of that. Most of us know to some extent the story when the people of Israel were in the land of Egypt and they ended up becoming enslaved there, and their life was horrible. And they cried out to God to deliver them. And he did. He did it in a magnificent way. It was very clear they were doing nothing, just standing watching God. And then he takes them out as his people. He takes them to this land that he promised to give them, a land that would be a great place for them to live. Not without its difficulties, but a great place for them to live. And when they were going there, he said, as he gave the law and how he wanted them to live and how he intended for them to live and interact with each other, he said, and we often miss this, but in the law that was given to Moses, God said, there's going to come a day when you're going to ask for a man to be your king instead of me. That's not going to work out for you, because the only way that life is really going to be lived the way I intend for it to be lived is for me to be your king. But you're going to come to a point where you're going to do that, and I'm going to warn you about it. It's not going to work out. It's not going to be what you think. But then he made provision for their sinful choice, their rejection of him. He says, but if you have a king, this is what you'll have to do. And so sure enough, there came a point years down the road when the people of Israel, they looked around, they said, boy, we want to be like everybody else. We want to do what the nations around us are doing. So we want a king. And the guy that was the prophet at that time, that God was mainly speaking to the people through this guy Samuel, he got mad. He says, oh, you're rejecting me. This is what we would call preacher complex. It's like, people get mad at the message and they take it out on the messenger, and the messenger gets all personally offended. So pastors have to watch that, you know. It's like, this isn't my deal. Some of you will get mad at me today. Get in line. There's a ton of people that do that. Sometimes it's just because I'm a donkey. Sometimes because you're mad at what God has to say. So God says, okay, Samuel, he says, Sam, go ahead, give him a king. And so they have 3 kings. Their first 3 kings all prove that it's a disaster. The first king is a guy named Saul. He looks very kingly. He's a tall guy, he's strapping. He even has a little bit of humility at the beginning. He fails miserably. He won't listen to God. He's more concerned about his image, how he looks to other people, how many people like him, his popularity, and he just goes down in flames. The next guy is David, who's famous. We all have heard of David to some degree or another. David was a fairly good king, but he still was a failure. He still had some major mess-ups where he brought shame to God's name and to the people of Israel. He had all kinds of horrendous things going on in his family. There was a lot of political turmoil going on while he was king. Even though he was a man after God's own heart, it wasn't because of those things. It was because he continually said, God, I'm wrong, you're right, and he repented. Sometimes it had to be pointed out to him. Other times he just came to that by himself. Then his son, Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived, the Bible tells us, very, very wealthy, probably among the richest, even accounting for inflation. And he asked God when he was young, I want wisdom to rule your people the way you want me to. And God said, I'm going to grant that to you, plus I'm going to give you a whole bunch of other stuff just because that was a great request. But he goes down in flames too. He gets sidetracked by political influence, power, wealth, pleasure, sex. He goes down the tubes. And then from there, it just gets worse in the history of Israel. They ask for a king, a man, but it's not God, and man falls short. So what did Jesus do? When he came to be the king that God intended for us to have, for us to be, ruling with and under him. If you would, turn with me to 1 Corinthians 15, 22 through 28. If you don't have a Bible or an app, you should be able to find a Bible under your seat or one real close to you. And in those Bibles, you'll be on page 961, I believe. If you're in an app on your device, I'll be reading from the English Standard Version most of this morning. If I'm not, I'll let you know that. But if you want to follow along the same version, you can cue up the ESV. You can follow along in most versions and be okay. So I'll give you a minute to get there. 1 Corinthians 15, 22 through 28. It says this, For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive, but each in his own order. Christ the firstfruits, then at his coming those who belong to Christ. Then comes the end when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father after destroying every rule and every authority and power. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. Let me pause there. Is it pretty clear who the king is here? Jesus is the king. He's coming to take over the whole earth, put everything under his authority, just like what he said in Matthew, so that he can present that to God the Father, his Father. Then it continues on. It says, The last enemy to be destroyed is death, for God has put all things in subjection under his feet. But when it says all things are put in subjection, it's plain that he is accepted who put all things in subjection under him. In other words, God the Father gives the Son this authority to be a king. Of course, his authority remains intact. He didn't abdicate anything in doing that, delegating that authority to the Son. When all things are subjected to him, then the Son himself will also be subjected to him who put all things in subjection under him, that God may be all in all. So, what do we see here? What's this saying in plain everyday language? Jesus came to reign with and under God. He placed himself in a position of submission. He took that delegation of the authority of God to be the king that God intended. Here's the thing I want us to see, though. Jesus came very differently than earthly kings, right? Very differently. I mean, if you read the Gospels a little bit, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, you see that. But let me just point out some of the principles there. Earthly kings, and this isn't limited to kings. I know we don't think, because we're Americans, we don't think in kings, We think of presidents and stuff like that. So very similar principles, but a king needs a lot of stuff, correct? A king needs a lot of stuff in order to be a king. They have to be served. If they're going to be a king, they need authority. So they're going to have to take it by force or by some other means like politics. Do we see this playing out right now? In the political process? I'm making no comment about that, but we see both, all the candidates, they're trying to say, this is why I should be an authority. This is why these guys shouldn't be. Now, they're not actually, as far as I know, coming to fistfights, although that may happen. But they're trying to, by power, by force, by influence, take authority. They have to do that, and they have to convince other people. And normally, if you're going to be a king or even a president or the supreme ruler of some place, you got to have some property. You got to have facilities, property, something that you're ruling over, physical stuff. And if you don't already have it, then probably you're going to have to take it from someone, correct? And if you're going to do that, you're probably going to have to go to war with them. You're going to have to fight them, take them over militarily, show them that you have the power to do what you want to do. And if you already have property, then you're going to need an army to defend it against other people that want to come in and take it. Do we all get this? Make sense? We see it playing out all around the world today? Sure. But if you're going to have an army, then you got to feed them. You got to supply them. You got to train them. You got to house them. Probably got to pay them. So what else do you need? Money. Where are you going to get money? Well, you're going to have to get rich people to give you money. And so if you're going to convince them, if you're going to talk them into that, you're probably going to need wise advisors to help you talk them into it, right? So do you see what earthly kings that we're used to, they have to have a ton of people serving them so that they can create their identity. Jesus didn't do any of that, correct? Jesus came humbly, not to be served, but to serve. If you would turn with me to Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 11. Philippians 2, 5 through 11. And in those Bibles under your chairs, you should be on page 980. Philippians 2, 5 through 11. Now I'm going to read this passage from the New Living Translation. It says this, you, and when it says you, it means you and I, those who claim to be followers of Jesus, those of us that are in God's family, He's our Father, Jesus is our King, you must have the same attitude that Jesus Christ had. Though He was God, He did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. In other words, He wasn't grasping for His identity. He didn't have to hold tight and make sure everybody knew who He was, God the Son. He understood His identity. He understood it was the identity that He had. He was secure in that. So He could just do what His Father had for Him to do. He did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, He gave up His divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When He appeared in human form, He humbled Himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Wow, that's a huge misunderstanding of His identity, wasn't it, by the people around Him? Therefore, God elevated Him to the place of highest honor and gave Him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Wow. Here's a guy, if we can say it this way, that's secure in his identity. He's able to do what he's supposed to do, what he's been commissioned to do by his Father, without worrying about what other people think. Do you ever wish you could be like that? I do. Sometimes. I have to remind myself, I'm serving God. I'm working for Jesus, my King, not what people think of me at the moment. Well, that's tough to do sometimes, isn't it? Do you ever struggle with that? I do. Some of you are going, oh, you shouldn't have told us that. Yeah, I do. Jesus is King. So since God reveals to us who He is through what He does, specifically through Jesus, what does Jesus do? He's going to reveal to us who He is through what He does. He's the King. We see that declared already. I'd like you to turn with me to John chapter 2. On page 887, Bible's under your chairs, if that's in your lap now, 887, John 2, verses 1 through 11. I want to read this. This is an account that probably many of us are fairly familiar with, but I want to point out a couple things to us here that we may not have noticed, or we may have given them lower priority than we could. On the third day, John 2, verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus was also invited. He didn't crash it. He was invited to the wedding with His disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to Him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, What does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. So Jesus is at a wedding. He's been invited with his group of apprentices, his disciples. This wasn't hundreds of people, but a handful of guys. This was very typical in the time. He's a rabbi. He's starting to be an up-and-coming teacher. And he travels around. He's gathering some apprentices, some guys he can mentor around him. So we don't know if Jesus was friends with his family or if his mom was friends with his family, because his mom's there too. But he's invited. He comes there. And typically at Jewish weddings, this is a huge celebration. And they have wine. And normally, what do? When you have any event that's catered and you have food or drink, what normally happens? They normally, if you got good caterers, they put out all the good stuff first. They make it look the best when people first come, because first impressions are what last, right? And then after you've had your first or second or third plate and you go up for another one, you're not as worried about the presentation anymore, are you? You just want more food. You're going up looking for. Same thing with drinks. There's usually the punch bowl and all that kind of stuff. Wine is typical here. So they have wine, and they run out of wine. Oh, this is this would be like you get halfway through the buffet line at a wedding reception, and all the food's gone. What are people thinking? They weren't too bright. They didn't plan ahead. Didn't they know how many people they invited? And if you're in the back half of the line that didn't get food, you're thinking other stuff too. Like, ugh. This is a huge embarrassment to the family and to the guy that's hosting it. And Mary comes up to Jesus and she says, hey, they're out of wine. In Jesus' reply here, it gets a little muddy for us in the translation, because sometimes we think he's sort of a smarty pants with his mom. That's not really what's coming across. He's just saying, Mom, this is not on the agenda. I'm here at a wedding to celebrate. It's not yet the timetable for me to reveal who I am. She has some idea who he is. Remember? The angel talked to her. She saw him in the temple when he was 12 years old. She has some clue there. Maybe not fully, but she has some clue. And she's coming saying, hey, you could take care of this. He says, Mom, this isn't on the agenda. I'm just here for the wedding. And she, being a good mom, kind of a typical mom, she just turns to the servants and she says, hey, whatever he tells you to do, you do it. And lets it go. Let me catch that up there. Verse 5, his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification. You know what that means, right? These are hand-washing jars. They're tall jars. The Jews had a lot of ritual purification stuff. Sometimes they fully washed their hands. Sometimes they just would put a drop in and let it. It was kind of a ritual thing, much like 5th grade boys do when you tell them to go wash their hands. Drop of water, let it roll around. Yep, I washed my hands. Just a ritual, not a real washing. But this is hand-washing jars. Probably tall, I don't know how tall, and it says here, there's 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. And they filled them up to the what? The brim. So let's just be conservative. There's 6 jars. They each hold a minimum of 20 gallons. So how much is that? 120 gallons. And they're filled right up to the brim. So we know they're full. Then what? They filled them up to the brim, and Jesus said to them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine, it did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you've kept the good wine until now. This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Did you catch what went on? It's a wedding celebration. Is Jesus the host? He's there as a guest. Is this his deal? Is this going to embarrass him if they run out of wine? No. And what does he do? He takes 6 water jars. This is not what you'd normally do. Hand-washing jars. It says fill them up. So there's at least 120 gallons. And what does he make? 120 gallons of wine. I don't think this was grape juice. The words don't lend itself to that. Now, does God promote partying in the way that we think of today? That our culture thinks of? Going out, getting drunk, getting high, that kind of stuff? No, he's very clear. This isn't wrong. But alcoholic beverages, God doesn't tell us anything about, hey, if you drink, that's wrong. Now, some people have struggled with it. We see the destruction of that in our culture, do we not? And so if you're a person that has problems with it, or you've seen that, and you say, I'm not going to touch it at all, that's great. That's fine. That's probably a smart road to go. If you don't have a problem, is it okay for you to drink a little wine or alcoholic beverage? Some of you go, I'm not tracking with you now. I'm not with you. Yeah, read the Bible. Actually, God says, when we sit at the great banquet feast of the Lamb, there will be wine there. My wife and I, a few years back, started drinking a little wine at dinner, just a small amount, more medicinal, and the first time we did it was really medicinal. It's like, ugh, we're not used to this. We didn't like it. And she was reading all the health benefits, and I was like, are you sure? And over time, you acquire a little bit of a taste. Maybe we should acquire a little taste, not that we have any desire to be in a drunken stupor, but God says this. Jesus makes wine, and it's not $3 Chuck either. This is good stuff. The guy comments. He doesn't know where it came from, and he goes, wow, usually people bring out the best stuff they have first, because first impressions thing. He says, you've saved the best to last. What kind of world do you live in? Because he wasn't saying the first stuff was terrible. He was just saying this stuff is really good, and that's not the way anybody does this. Who knew about this? The host didn't know. Did the bride and groom and their families know? Just a few people, because Jesus said, this isn't the agenda. It's not time for me to reveal who I am. But a few people, his apprentices and a couple of the servants that did what he asked them to do, they understand what's going on there. So what did Jesus do here? How did he serve? He's the king. He doesn't make a big deal out of it. He doesn't draw attention. He doesn't go around passing out flyers. Here's my card, What does he do? He does it quietly. He serves humbly. Only a few people know about it. He's not worried about that. How does he serve? He brings better wine to the celebration. I want that to stick with us. He has an opportunity before him. He can bring better wine. He can improve the celebration by bringing better wine to the celebration. Now I want you to turn over a few chapters to John chapter 13. At another celebration, and you'll be on page 900 if you have those Bibles under your chair, or one exactly like mine. John 13, 1 through 17. And the first couple of verses are critical for us to get these principles. John 13, starting with verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, another celebration. This one very different than a wedding. It's very focused on God, especially God's salvation, his deliverance, his provision. Before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew, notice the things he knows here. He knew that his hour had come to depart out of the world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God. Do you see how this is rooted in his identity, his security, in who he is? Do you pick that up there? It's okay to nod your head. I like it when you nod your head. He sees that. This is just, wow, this is right here. It's been there all along, but I've often missed it myself. It's rooted in his identity. He's secure in knowing who he is and what the work is that the Father's given him to do. Knowing all this, it says, he rose from supper, verse 4. He laid aside his outer garments and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. This is a job of a servant. Or in a poor family, maybe the host would do it, but Jesus was really the honored guest here. These guys all were acknowledging that he is the promised one, the Messiah, the Savior, and they're celebrating this high religious feast, this celebration that's a kind of the centerpiece of the Jewish year. And they had other feasts and celebrations too, but this was a huge one. And they come in, nobody has paid attention to this detail because they're out walking on hot, dusty roads. It was common courtesy when you came in somewhere to eat, to somebody to provide some water and a towel to wash feet. If they had a servant, they'd have the servant do it. They might do it. At least it would be provided, but nobody had attended to this detail. And Jesus is the king. And he knows that, and he's secure in that. He's not worried about what other people think. But he sees this detail has been missed, and so what does the king do? He serves. He does something that nobody else wants to do, that they might think is beneath them. And for us, this resonates with us in a different way than it would in that culture. There it was a common thing, but we think of like washing people's feet. Ugh, yeah, I don't want to do that. I know there's some churches I've come across in our travels that practice that as a, kind of like we would celebrate communion or they do baptism, they'd practice foot washing. But when the few times I've observed that, nobody is like, yeah, all right. We get to wash people's feet. I've been waiting all week for this. No, not usually. Jesus serves by taking the towel. See, this is catchy for me, and it could be for you too. He served in the first instance, the first celebration, by bringing better wine to the celebration. To this celebration, he brings the towel. He serves. He does that cleanup job that nobody else wants to do. And by the way, both of these are at celebrations. So just as a side thought, apart from what we're really looking at, could it be that God wants us to celebrate him more than we do or think? Could that be possible? Some of the guys, and you can keep reading there, I'm not going to continue reading the whole passage just for time's sake, but now you have where it is in the context, and you can check it out again later and make sure that what I'm saying matches what God tells us here. Some of them, like Peter, understand this is not normal. They're like, wait a minute, you shouldn't be doing this. This is not your place. You're the king. You're our teacher. You're the honored guest here. You can't wash my feet. That's what Pete says. You can't wash my feet. And Jesus says, oh, I'm glad you noticed that this is abnormal, but yes, I am going to wash your feet because this is what, I'm setting an example here. I'm doing a teaching moment. I am the king who serves, and I'm going to have you guys serve each other too. And he makes it a teachable moment. Peter, of course, he's just all over the place, so he's like some of us. When Jesus says, no, I have to wash your feet or you're not even going to have a part with me. And he's like, okay, give me a whole bath then. He's like, calm down, Pete. That's not what we're doing. That's not the normal thing. I'm doing the typical thing that we do, as a courtesy, washing the feet. That's all you need. And then he says, hey, guys, did you see what just happened here? Well, look with me at verse 12. When he had washed their feet, put on his outer garments, and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. He says, you're saying that I'm your teacher and that I'm your Lord, I'm your king. And he goes, and that's a great statement because it's true. I am that. He says, if I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I've given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. And then he goes on to say, a servant isn't greater than his master, a messenger isn't greater than the one that has sent him. And verse 17 is great. This is a verse that annoys me all the time. It says, if you know these things, blessed are you if you what? Do them. The happiness isn't in knowing. You got to know. Knowing's important, but where does Jesus say the happiness will come, the joy? Where's that going to come from? If you know what he tells you to do, if you do it. That's the point of us knowing things. Again, our kids, we just have way too many stories about our kids. Going as their teens. Hey, I want you to take the garbage out. I know, Dad. Well, I'm glad you know, but what's the goal? Here. My goal isn't for you to know, it's for you to actually do it. And the reason I'm reminding you is you still haven't done it. Jesus says the same thing. He says, if you know these things, happy are you if you do them. I am your king, and what have I done? I've served you. So, if you're my servants, what will you do? You will serve each other. I've given you that example. So, let me ask this question for us. What if you and I start seeing Jesus as our true and better boss every day? Because we don't relate to kings much, so I put boss in. If you like king, keep going with it, king. But what if we started seeing Jesus as our true and better boss every day? Well, guess what? That's exactly what he wants. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. If you would like to, you can turn there. It's on page 947. I want to read this to you. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers. Brothers includes sisters in this context. It's a plural. It's not just guys. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. He says, don't let your thinking continue on with what you see around you and the culture around you, that if you're the boss, if you're the king, if you're the person in authority, you have to lord it over everybody. Everybody has to serve you. He goes, no, my kingdom's upside down from that. You serve just like I served you. I'm the king. What do? I serve. I want to read that also from the Message. The Message is a more recent, kind of a paraphrase deal. It's not a great study Bible, but sometimes it just puts things so nice and clearly. So let me read that same passage from the Message. So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for Him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. So what does this mean for us? As we're identified with the Son. The Father, we saw that last week. That means God is our Father. He loves us. We're in His family. And because of that, then we are children of God. We love each other as family. This week we're looking at the Son. Who's the Son? Jesus is King. Who is God the Son? That's the question. Who is God? He is our King. What has He done? He served. So who are we if we accept what Jesus has done for us? Who are we if we're His children? We are servants of the King of Kings. And if we believe this, what will we do? We'll serve. Not only each other, but as we read through what Jesus has told us and what the instruction He gives us in the New Testament, He says, and especially focus on those that nobody else will serve. Bring the better wine, bring the towel. Whichever is appropriate in the situation. So, what's the application? What's your assignment this week? Some of you are going, I hope he forgets that. Nope. It's a little simpler this week, though, in some ways. The first part is, this is what all of us can do. Ask yourself this. To whom can I bring the better wine or the towel this week? There's probably only several thousand varieties of that we can encounter this week. So as you look around, ask God, to whom can I bring the better wine or the towel this week? God, open my eyes through your Spirit who's in me. And then here's a hint. When you ask God for direction, then obey it. When He shows you, act on it. Do it. Another question you and I can ask ourselves this week, how can I celebrate God this week? Doesn't necessarily have to be a big blowout, although if you do that, I have a couple nights open, I'll tell you when they are. It could be that, but how can I celebrate God this week? Well, it's easy for me to get depressed and discouraged by all the things that are going around in our culture, sometimes in our community, sometimes in our church. And I forget all that God has given me and done for me and declared about me. How about you? Do you ever get that way? You don't have to shake your head on this one, and somebody might be looking at you. Ask myself, how can I bring the better wine or towel this week? God, I'm asking for your direction. I'm going to be obedient when you show me. And how can I celebrate you, God, this week? And then if you want some extra credit, Romans 12, 1 and 2 that we just looked at, read it again and think on it and ask yourself, there's some questions in your supplemental notes. What are some everyday routines that can be used to celebrate God in my life? What are stuff that I do regularly that I can celebrate God? What weekly activities am I involved in on a regular basis where I could start bringing the better wine or the towel to those things? With whom can I celebrate God, my King, this week? And there's a couple of passages in Matthew and James that you can read that are listed in your notes that will help you process through that. So, big assignment that everyone should be doing is how can I bring the better wine or towel this week, and how can I celebrate God this week? And then there's some extra stuff to go on if you get that accomplished. Okay. So, who are we? Well, who is God? He's the King. What does he do? He serves. So who are we? We're servants of the King of Kings. We get the opportunity to rule with and under him. And how do we do that? Same way Jesus did, by serving each other and those around us, especially the least in our community, those that nobody else wants to fool with. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your love to us, the consistency and the thoroughness of your provision for us. It just, well, if we really stop to think about it, get our focus off ourselves, it's overwhelming. It's incomprehensible that you would do this for us, even though we were your enemies, even though we rejected you, that you would allow us to be your children, that you would declare us to be that based on not who we are or what we've done, but on what our Savior Jesus has done. We thank you that you're in control. There's times when we look around, it doesn't look like you are, but you say you are, and then we see glimpses of that as we keep our eyes open. You're the King, and yet you serve us. So help us to see the identity that you've given us, to really grasp that. We know that when we do, then service is going to flow out of us in humility, unlike the culture around us. And help us not to get that backwards, that we just try to do a lot of things to help people, to create our own identity. That will never work. That fails. We have to live out of who you've declared us to be through what Jesus has done for us. So we thank you for that in his name. Amen.